Our next speaker is Mick Sheldrick, who is an Australian. He's actually coming to us live from the Australian Embassy. Love the background, Mick. That's a pretty flush-looking background you got there at the Embassy in Washington, D.C. I've been following Michael's career for a while now. Michael Sheldrick is a policy entrepreneur and a driving force behind the efforts of Global Citizen to end extreme poverty. As co-founder and chief policy impact and government affairs officer, he leads the organization's campaigns to mobilize support from governments, businesses, and foundations. He's the author of a brand new book, the upcoming Amazon bestseller, From Ideas to Impact, a playbook for influencing and implementing change in a divided world. It's going to be published in just a couple of months on April 9th. But we're going to be giving away 7 books today. So stay really tune into what Mick's saying, because there's going to be a quiz afterwards. With a career that spans the world of pop and policy, Michael has worked with an impressive roster of international artists such as Beyonce, Coldplay, Idris and Sabina Elba, Lady Gaga, Miley Cyrus, Priyanka Chopra, Rihanna, and Usher, as well as prominent political leaders, including Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and former Australian Prime Ministers Julia Rudd and Kevin Rudd. Mick, it's great to have you with us. Thank you for making time to join the symposium. Congratulations on the book, and we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to share. From Ideas to Impact is the name of the book, and this is a perfect subject for us today as we focus on implementation. Mick Sheldrick.
Well, thank you, and really thank you, Ben. Ben, I just want to make sure, how long have I got? Because I know you are.
You got a good 8 to 10 minutes. You got a good 8 to 10 minutes as planned. So if you can do it in 8, that's great.
Okay, no worries. Well, really appreciate you all. Really thank you all. I'm coming here from live Washington, D.C., where we've just had a fantastic event here, actually on the same issue of implementation. And, one of the things I've been saying around the world right now is Global Citizen released a report last year called the Global Solidarity Report. And what that showed is that in overwhelming majorities, people around the world, whether you're in America, Nigeria, India, or Australia, identify as global citizens. What we see by and large is people are ahead of where their leaders are. But what we see at the same time, while people are still willing to give democracy, the UN, and other key institutions the benefit of the doubt, what we also see is that people by and large also say that they don't see how the performance of these institutions are having an impact in their own lives. And so I believe we've got a window of opportunity where we can channel this momentum, this good faith, and actually overcome people's doubts and show performance, but it won't last forever. And so I call this crisis of implementation. And in my book, From Ideas to Impact, I outline 8 principles of what I call policy entrepreneurship. Policy entrepreneurship is the idea that you don't have to be a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. You don't have to be tied to a big institution, but you can be an everyday citizen who cares about these issues, and you can have a profound impact on the biggest policy challenges of our time. And I'm going to share with you just a few brief ideas of what we're discussing here. But firstly, very brief overview of why I wrote this book. As Ben said, like Ben, I'm from Australia. And, I remember growing up and, going to bring this to analogy at high school. I wasn't great at sports, right? There was many, when I was growing up, there were many great examples of, sporting heroes, sporting legends that in Australia we idolize. And when we would do motivational talks at our school, we would usually get in one of these sporting heroes. We would have an Olympic gold medalist, an Australian football rules legend come and speak to us. And it would be really inspiring. But if you were like me, you would be sat in the audience and you would be thinking, well, this is all well and good. You've already achieved your trophy. You've achieved your gold medal. But if you're like me, who can't kick a footy in the right direction, how would this make an impact? And I could imagine, you know, when we've had people reaching out saying, how can you make a difference in policy change? What we've built at Global Citizen is a platform of 11 million members around the world. We have an audience of over 100 million reach. We're in 150 countries. And I was like, you know, I didn't want the idea that in order to influence policy, which is fundamentally about people, you know, to give the idea or impression that you need to launch your own huge organization in order to do that. So the book is really a start, and it's a start of 8 principles. And I'm going to walk you through a few of them right now with some examples. And the first is what I always say is the power of knowing your goal. Now, knowing your goal, what I say is it's about having a SMART goal. It's about having a goal which is clear, it's concise, it's very, very visible in terms of how you can make an impact. One of my favorite examples of this is Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados. This is a country which, you know, I think you would have to, in terms of its GDP, in terms of American cities, you would have to scroll all the way through America's top 300 cities until you got to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to find a city that's comparable with the size of Barbados economy. And yet the leader of this small nation of 300,000 people is having a profound impact on the global stage. And why is that? You know, Prime Minister Mottley is not the first leader of a small island nation to talk about the impacts of climate change. And yet the reason why her agenda has gotten so much traction on the global stage comes from the fact that last year at the UN, she told an audience, she said, simplicity gets us to the end. If we campaign on everything, we will lose. And what she's launched is this initiative called the Bridgetown Initiative. And the Bridgetown Initiative at its core asks the question, it said, okay, during the pandemic, wealthy nations, right, printed billions of dollars in money in order to stimulate their economy. And in America, for instance, America was able to give people paying mortgages basically the opportunity to defer payment on those mortgages, right, until after the pandemic had ended. They gave a break to students repaying their student loans. And there's evidence to suggest that's what kept the American economy afloat. And she said, well, for nations like hers on the front lines of the climate crisis, if you're in the Dominican Republic, which, for instance, had its whole economy wiped away in a matter of days by a hurricane in 2017, or if you're in Malawi, which last year through Cyclone Freddie, literally saw the world's longest lived cyclone, longest lived. It lasted 48 hours. And if you're that country where it sat on you for 48 hours and it killed in that period over 1,200 people and left farms devastated, it destroyed over 300 bridges. If you're these countries, right, you faced a dual challenge of how to respond to a crisis that you didn't cause, and yet at the same time, you're also repaying huge amounts of debt, right? In Malawi's case, a quarter of its entire revenues annually is going towards paying its loans. How can you respond to these crises? And so she, basically her argument was simple. She said, why isn't it the case that if a hurricane hits a country like Barbados, that there is an immediate pause in its debt loan repayments for 2 years? And instead of repaying those loans, again, Malawi, a quarter of its revenues, it can use those revenues to invest in its schools, its hospitals, rebuilding homes in a way that they can withstand natural disasters. And the simplicity and the clarity around that idea, she was at first laughed at the room by Wall Street. And in the space of 12 months, she had the biggest lenders in the world, such as the World Bank, the UK, the US Treasury, saying that's a good idea. We will adopt that. And so this comes to the power of having a good goal, when it comes to implementation. There's many problems in the world. We can diagnose problems. We can talk about challenges. But this was her idea. The second key principle is know your stakeholders and how to matter. You know, a good example I often use was back in 2015, we were focused on the eradication of polio. And there was this meeting, it was the final meeting the Queen attended of all these Commonwealth leaders, and they converged in the middle of the Mediterranean in Malta. And people said to me, how will you get Malta to prioritize this issue? They're neither a country impacted by polio, and they're neither a country which is a significant donor. So we had all of our global citizens around the world. We sent emails, we sent tweets, we sent letters to the editor, to the Prime Minister of Malta. And eventually we got an email back saying, I've gotten all your emails, letters, phone calls, etc. What about a phone call? What can we do? And we convinced the Prime Minister of Malta to put polio on the agenda, because what we basically said is this is an issue which will actually make a tangible, concrete difference. And that was the moment the Commonwealth renewed its partnership to polio. And now, just last year, there was 12 cases of polio worldwide. And we're now on the brink of making it just the second human disease in history to be eradicated. The third principle I talk about briefly is embrace pragmatic idealism. You know, there are many examples around the world where people have great ideas, they're great idealists, but they don't know how to implement them. Woodrow Wilson, just last weekend, it was 100 years since his death. He had the great idea of the League of Nations. How do you prevent conflict ever taking place again in the world? And yet people assume that when he brought his idea back to America, that isolationists in the American Senate voted it down. But that wasn't the case. There was a chorus of the willing, actually willing to partner with Woodrow Wilson and say, we'll make some adjustments, but can you vote? And he said, no, it's my way or the highway. It's a cautionary tale. Again, to finish on this last story, Mia Motley, you know what she did? When we were in Paris, 19 days in office, the new president of the World Bank, she stood on stage. We had everyone from Billie Eilish to President Lula, 20,000 raving climate activists. And President R.J. Banger of the World Bank said, you know what, Mia, I'm going to make a commitment that I'm going to put in every new agreement from the World Bank, I'm going to put a clause in that if there's a natural disaster, there will be an automatic break in repayments. And for a country like Barbados, that's the equivalent of 15% of its economy, $700 million. And as she made this announcement, she thanked President Macron for hosting this extraordinary summit, right? And basically supporting her agenda. And President Macron was not popular in Paris at the time. And they started booing and they said, Macron must resign. He must resign now. And Prime Minister Motley, who is a hero, a leader of the climate movement, was faced with this, you know, fork in the road, if you like. And she turned around and she said, against all the booing, very intimidating, 20,000 people, she said, my friends, I hear you. But whether you like it or not, of all the world's wealthiest economies, the only one supporting and standing up for small island nations on the front lines is President Macron. You may not like that, but that's our reality. And I saw it, and suddenly the audience stopped booing, and there was a silence, and then they broke out in applause. And I think this idea of pragmatic idealism, how do you get things done in a divided era, often means engaging with people we don't like. And that comes to my final point, is communicate stories of success. The research, by and large, shows that when we have an example of impact in our own communities, when you make a difference, whether you get a response, one of the best things you can do is share that with your friends or family. Because in an era where people lack trust, they still trust their localized circuits. And one of the best ways to show that you can make a difference is to show that indeed we have already made a difference as well. And so this is at the core of this book, From Ideas to Impact. There's many examples around the world. And I want to finish with a brief survey. This is your chance to earn a copy for free, as Ben said, and it will also measure if you've been listening to this presentation. The first is, what is a policy entrepreneur? Can they be a professional lobbyist?
Mick, we've got a special Mentimeter quiz which is going to track all of the results. So we're going to get over to the quiz right now. So we won't give them too long to think about it, because speed will help determine who's going to get a book. But let me just jump in there, Mick, and say thank you for that great presentation. We're going to jump on and do the quiz now. If you want to stop screen sharing for a moment. And Mick, congratulations again on the book and those lessons, those 8 lessons that you've distilled from your incredible experience over the last decades and a half in this space. Really extraordinarily valuable as we go from ideas to impact. And we're really proud, Mick, of what you and the Global Citizen team have achieved these years.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Ben. And I'll leave you with one final quote from my hero, Eleanor Roosevelt. The best way to begin is to begin. And I hope this has given you a small start. My apologies again for skipping a story. Thank you, Ben. This has been fantastic, and looking forward to partnering with you and maybe joining the Q&A later. Thank you.